My $5 ebook has woken a lot of people. I mean, it's $5, right? What's that? But it has woken a lot of people up to what's possible because of those different things that I have to do because I don't come from money. But we're gonna get this house. So what do we got to do to get this house? If you don't come from money, you get a little here, you get a little there. I put money together you didn't even know you had. All right. So do you know what I mean? But that's how you have to do it if you don't come from that background. And crowdsourcing isn't just something you can do.
I want to ask you a question. You said a lot of your audience happens to be Black professionals, and there's going to be all sorts of people listening to this. But I want to speak to
all sorts of people. But yeah, the people who actually yeah,
and in your audience as well. But I want to speak to their experience, particularly as an investor who happens to be Black. And I think sometimes historically, we like these things happen in the past. These kind of things. There's some people in society who say that, but I just want to speak to and have you maybe inform us a little bit about. Are there any unique challenges, differences, if you are a Black professional who's trying to get into the real estate investing game, and maybe just help us understand those a little bit more?
The biggest thing is the lack of generational wealth, and that when you go look for information, it is people who do have generational wealth. There's a wealth gap. They say Black America versus white America, like we have $5,000 and you have $105,000 on average, right? That makes a difference because if your advice is for people who generally are in that same social economic circle, that's not advice that works for me. So a big thing that I tell people is like the messenger matters. And like if you have money, like that's fine, but we really have to understand that like what they're saying, they're not necessarily saying it to be antagonistic. They're just saying it from their viewpoint, but we have to be even more savvy to be like, okay, this is when they're talking to them. This is when they're talking to me. Right. So just finding basic information can be hard because you have to sift through so much to see if that's actually something you can do before you start asking your friends and family to raise $500,000 and they're looking at you like you're crazy. And you're like, maybe I should just keep doing it. It's like, you got to know your audience, right? You got to know your people too. And that is advice that works for them, but not necessarily your community. So that's a struggle too, because you want to know as much as possible about real estate investing. But if the 90% of the advice is from people who come from generational wealth and you just don't have that in your friends and family circle, that can make getting that 10% of it, that can make it more nerve-wracking and for you to get started because you never really feel like you have information that's good for you. So that's like the first
thing. There's always a gap.
Yeah, and you want to educate yourself before you start, right? And so if the education isn't written for you, that's a major barrier because real estate investing can be very negative. It can cost you a lot of money. There are a lot of horror stories, right? And if you can't even get information that you feel comfortable with, you sort of get stuck. So I do have a lot of people that said before I worked with you, I've been thinking about this for 10 years, but all that advice went over my head. It didn't make sense. I couldn't do it. So that's inhibiting in itself, right? Because you want to know as much as possible before you get started, but you want to know it from someone who understands your struggles or your pocketbook or your financial situation or reality. So that's the first thing that has halted a lot of people. So, my $5 ebook has woken a lot of people. I mean, it's $5, right? What's that? But it has woken a lot of people up to what's possible because of those different things that I have to do because I don't come from money, but we're going to get this house. So what do we got to do to get this house? If you don't come from money, you get a little here, you get a little there. I put money together you didn't even know you had. All right. Do you know what I mean? But that's how you have to do it if you don't come from that background, and crowdsourcing isn't just something you can do. So education was problematic, right? The next thing is that was the big one. Now getting financing and funding, remember we don't necessarily have the money. It has to work differently. So this also goes back to education. A lot of it really goes back to education. Like you're supposed to get this A-class neighborhood, but you're like, I got $15,000. It took me 10 years to save it. Right. I can't afford a $250,000 house to make $200 a month. Like what sense does that make? Right. So that goes also back to like what the prevalent knowledge is, but that doesn't work. And it's just like, look, I had to go to college. No one paid for my school. I make, so in my group, I talk about the differences in wealth. Like I did make 38% less than my white coworker. There were two of us. He was a white male, and there was me. I was making 82. He was making 104. We were the two people on the team. Okay. So we were both seniors, right? Yeah. So, and the only reason I got that information is because after a couple months, he got comfortable with me. He could tell me. Right. So other people know they might be making more money and they're not telling you because they want to keep the privilege. So that needs to be discussed. So not only do I have the same bills, but I'm making less money than you. Right. And so we have to, my prices for my trainings could be a lot higher if I did not focus on the Black community. But again, you have to know the group you're working with. I do scale it because we don't have that generational wealth. So I have friends who are coaches and they name off 10, 15. And don't get me wrong, there's Black people who pay those, like fortune builder prices, 30,000. Right. Don't worry, we got it in the community. But as a whole, I can charge more, but I choose not to because I understand that not everyone just has that super disposable sitting around like that. And our experiences haven't always been, they did pay the money for rich dad or poor dad, and they did pay the money for fortune builders, and they came out of it without a house. So not only did you, the little bit that you had when you did invest because you wanted to know more, you still came out not knowing how to go about it because the advice and the offers were for people with a lot more money and capital access than you.
So generational wealth is, I mean, obviously.
All goes back to that.
Yeah, how you've unpacked that and explained that has really been, because I think some people hear that in the news and like, well, that's, even if people who are sympathetic to, they're like, well, that's bad. That's horrible. But then when you think about it from an investor, an individual standpoint, you're going to go buy a property, and there are so many people who go to who had their grandparents had some money or something. And then, grandma is going to loan me 20 grand to help me buy my first house, or parents or whatever. And if that's been neglected in the past, and we could talk all about the systemic issues that caused a lot of that. That'd take us a whole nother 2 hours. Right?
I mean, even me making less money, like me, I am right the now. Wealth gap, right? Yeah, I was making less than my coworker. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, we're doing the same thing, right? But like, we're living in the same world, same expenses, and I'm making less. Like, that is a real thing that impacts how fast I'm going to get to generational wealth if I go through the standard system that they put in place for us. I've chose to opt out, and that's what my real estate investing has been for me. I opt out of the system.
I hope you enjoyed this clip from my interview with Lisa Phillips. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below if you have any follow-up questions or comments. And if you want to hear the full interview that I had with Lisa, I have a link below to the podcast, which will give you the full 55-minute interview. If you're new here to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the little bell so you don't miss any of the videos I have coming in the future. And if you like these kind of topics about practical real estate investing or getting started with your real estate investing journey, be sure to see the playlist that I have linked below about how to get started. It's all sorts of different topics about what those first steps are, also interviews with other people who talk about their experience buying their first property, the first few properties. So if you're new to investing, be sure to check that out. I think you'll enjoy that playlist. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Chad Carson. You've been watching Coach Carson TV, which is all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and doing more of what matters. See you next time.